You're listening to The Coffee Nation Show by We The Origin. This is a podcast that tells the story of coffee innovators and leaders who are pushing the boundaries of coffee as we know it. My name is Abbas Aladina, and I'm the founder at We The Origin, where we solve coffee's biggest problems with technology and innovation. We're disrupting coffee supply chains, one farmer at a time. We are currently living through a coffee pricing crisis. Coffee is a $400 billion industry, yet coffee farmers struggle to make a living through coffee production, and many of them are closing down their coffee farms. There are massive inequities in the coffee supply chain. On the Coffee Nation show, I'm sitting down with founders in the coffee industry to talk about their personal stories, the lessons they've learned, and how we can collaborate to make the coffee industry more sustainable, transparent, and equitable. Hello everyone, and welcome to the Coffee Nation podcast. This is our first podcast at We The Origin, and I'm super excited to be here today with Phil and Bruno from Barocco Coffee Company. How are you guys doing?
Good. It's great to be here, boss.
Yeah, thanks for being here with us.
Excellent. Thank you.
All right, so I'm loving your facility. What you got here is beautiful, and I really want to know more about the story and the history of the company. So maybe you can take me through how everything started.
Certainly. I think the origin story for Barocco is an interesting one. It's probably unlike most others. It was actually founded by a gentleman by the name of Nunzio Tamino, who was the founder and chairman of Aurora Importing, a company that had been around since the 60s, importing over 2,000 products from all over Italy. And he had started this coffee company originally to be a joint venture with an Italian roasting company, and then there was the economic crisis in Italy and they pulled out. So he had kind of reverted to doing private label coffee under the Aurora brand name, and it wasn't really doing that well. And I happened to meet him. I owned and operated 2 espresso bars in the city called B Espresso Bar, and met him, and just a very incredible individual. And I was looking to get involved in a different aspect of coffee, and I decided to do a 6-month contract here at Barocco, and fell in love with the roasting end of things, and decided to buy into the company. And took it from there. So that would have been back in 2012. The company started in 2010. Wow. So that was 8 years ago. And basically took the company from a private label roasting company to a specialty coffee roaster that had a completely different direction. And then I met Phil in 2015 as we were looking to add a working partner. And we basically had very similar philosophies. Different skill sets, and he helped us get to the company to another level. He had a corporate background, and he can explain a little more about his involvement.
Yeah, thanks. No, you can tell that you've got a lot of experience in the industry, that's for sure, and you brought that with you when you moved over to Barocco. So I can see the impact that you guys have had in growing this brand, and I'd love to learn a bit more about your own personal journeys and kind of how you got started as well with the company.
Thanks, Abbas.
Yeah.
So I'd known Nunzio Tamino for many, many years. We had a family company as well. He had a family company. We had bought and sold from one another literally over decades. And I had started another company, and I had just sold that and came to see Nunzio because he was doing a transition with his company, just to see how he was doing and touch base. And he is the one, as Bruno said, that introduced me to Bruno. I didn't even know that he had a coffee company. So Bruno and I had never met, and coffee was one of the items, food items I'm passionate about. And Bruno and I, Bruno kind of grew on me. It wasn't love at first sight, but he did grow on me. But I really liked what he did. I liked the direction he was headed. I liked what he built. And I think the company had legs and it had opportunity. And I was very excited to get involved and take it to that next step.
Phil had a very good corporate background, having spent, he had the entrepreneurial part in the earlier part of his career with within the grocery business, but then he had 12 years at Kellogg's. So he brought a lot of good systems and formality. So we work well together because I tend to be more like the Wild West cowboy, and he's more the, reining me in. So the two of us together tend to really have a good balance into how we've grown the company and the decisions we make. Yeah. So it's been a pleasure.
Yeah, I can see the synergies, and that's the thing about coffee. It's like this magical thing that brings people together, whether it's socially or whether from a business perspective, just brings people together, and what you guys have done together has been amazing so far. So well done. So Bruno, I know there's been a lot of evolution over the years. You guys started as more of a grocery store coffee company, and now you've obviously evolved into more specialty coffee. So there's been a lot of decisions, I'm sure, and challenges that have come across your way. What is one of the biggest challenges that you've had in this journey, and how did you overcome it?
Yeah, I think the biggest challenge was certainly when I entered it, and the company was really going in one direction, and to be able to speak to the group of investors and ownership to say it's got to go in a completely the other direction was the biggest challenge, because you have a lot of inertia when you start a company, and to turn that around was really challenging. But we have really good people here, and that made it happen. So you're looking at more of a commodity, lower priced coffee, high volumes, low margins, to low volume, small batch roasting, specialty coffee. So, we had to redevelop all the blends, reevaluate how we bought, where we bought from, what we wanted to be, and then create a brand. There was no real branding other than the name. And the name Barocco was chosen by Mr. Tomino because he's from a part in Sicily that has Baroque architecture. So Barocco in Italian is Baroque architecture, and he loved that architecture. So I love the old world feel to the name, the European part of it, but we wanted to give it an identity and a brand. So we created the coat of arms to demonstrate the history, but then we also created a very nice, clean, modern looking word logo.
Right.
And then we put Caffè Artigianale underneath it, in Italian is artisanal coffee.
Right. Yeah, no, I love the logo. I love the coat. It feels like you're in Italy when you're looking at it. It really creates that feel, and it creates that vibe that, hey, this is something special and has a lot of history behind it, just instantly when you look at it. So,
exactly, that was the intention.
Yeah. And you mentioned one of the challenges was just getting the existing investors and other folks involved to understand that, hey, we need to go in a different direction. And in coffee, that's something that we're starting to see now. But you guys pioneered this. If you did this back in 2012, how did you convince everyone that, hey, we got to go in a new direction?
I guess I had a little bit of experience from that from B Espresso Bar, because I started B Espresso Bar back in 2003. And I was looking for the name of the cafe. And I chose B Espresso Bar, the B to represent the barista, to honor the barista. Everybody thought it was because it was Bruno, but it wasn't.
I thought that too.
Yeah. And but back then, believe it or not, there was hardly any place that was called whatever Espresso Bar. Everything was cafe or coffee shop or whatever. There was Bulldog Coffee that was kind of at the starting end of it. There was Mercury that had started at the time, Dark Horse Coffee. These are independents that today are important cafes in the city. But back then, so I'd kind of already experienced doing something that no one else is doing and everyone thinking you're crazy.
Right.
So yeah. I think when I joined Barocco, taking the company in a direction that was opposite was kind of a natural thing to do, and seeing where the trend was going, with quality becoming important. Back then, there wasn't that many independent espresso bars. Now there's an explosion of independence in North America and in Toronto. It hit after maybe some of the cities like New York and Chicago and San Francisco, but Toronto certainly, from a Canadian standpoint, and Vancouver were the kind of the early ones.
So now with the third wave specialty coffee movement, the average consumer is slowly starting to understand what specialty coffee is. But back in 2012, how was it in the market? Did the average consumer know what you guys were doing with specialty coffee? And how did you know that this was the path to go down?
Well, it was a challenge because I saw the trend was taking root in the States, and I knew that it was coming here. It was started earlier in Vancouver, and what we decided to do was basically reevaluate all of our offerings to cater to the specialty coffee. The challenge is that because grocery stores were where the majority of people purchase coffee, it's one item on a grocery store shelf,
Right.
That you're trying to get people's attention on, and it's very hard to convey that in that manner. So we saw the trend developing where more and more people were starting to buy their coffee from cafes, from local roasters, and then eventually online. So the timing was right for us to make that change and to be, part of that switch.
Yeah, no, it's great that you're able to see that, and that's one of the things you need to succeed in business, right? Like Wayne Gretzky says, skate to where the puck's going, not where it is. So you're able to kind of see that trend developing, and you're able to capitalize on that, which is great. So one thing I've noticed in the coffee industry is, people that succeed are very resilient, right? So this is a great challenge that you guys saw and overcame. But more recently, we've had another challenge, right? So COVID has really kind of changed everything, right? I mean, in coffee, we face challenges all the time, but this is one time where the entire industry has just been stressed to the limit. So how has it impacted you at Barocco?
Well, it had a very negative impact, especially in the early weeks since the pandemic hit, and we had to unfortunately lay everyone off. And my partner Phil and I tried to do most of the work, and we relied on our core team, which is Carl and Noah, our roasters, to help us out part-time, to a point where we started to recover a bit, and we noticed our online sales started to really spike, and that we weren't big in the online because one of the pivots that we did when we switched the company from grocery store to food service was really focused on restaurants, bars, hotels. My philosophy was, if we sell a case of coffee to a restaurant, we know that the customers are going to be drinking that coffee, right? Because customers are going in. You sell a case of coffee to a grocery store, you don't know how long that coffee is going to sit on the shelf, right? Yeah. If consumers are drinking it at the restaurant and you're able to brand it and you're able to communicate what they're drinking to them, then they'll seek it out when they're not at the restaurant. Yeah. So that's how we kind of went about it. So when this hit, it hit hard because all of our business was in food service. Restaurants, bars, and especially hotels were the hardest hit. They all shut down to zero. So that's been a big challenge. So what we've found is we've used this time. How there's a lot of people in business that say, "Oh, I hate this part of my business, but we can't. We're too busy. We can't just stop everything and change it." Well, now all of a sudden everything stopped. So it's given us an opportunity to really reevaluate everything.
Right. Yeah, it's been a challenge for everyone I've spoken to in the coffee industry, and like with coffee, it's a very complex mechanism of how to deliver a good experience to the end consumer. And if you're throwing your coffee in a grocery store, you don't have much say in how that coffee is consumed, right? The end consumer might take it and they might mess it up. Right. So working through people where you're able to train the business or the cafe on how to prepare an espresso shot or how to create a filter coffee allows you to retain that quality in the coffee. And with all these businesses going and closing down during COVID, I can see that your whole customer base basically disappeared overnight. And at the beginning of March, everyone was just freaking out. And everyone has been forced to reevaluate their business models. So it's great that you guys are able to look at more online delivery methods and still delivering your coffee to that end consumer. In addition to kind of going online, is there anything else that you've evolved with, or Any other opportunities you've seen post-COVID in terms of how consumers are consuming coffee or any other behaviors?
Certainly. I mean, we opened up our first kind of bricks and mortar cafe in downtown Toronto on College Street called Barocco by Nino. It was a joint venture with Nino Diversa Bakery because we wanted to have a food and dessert component to it. And we opened that up in October. So, 5 months in, and this pandemic hits, we were just getting our feet under us and starting to hit our stride.
Right.
So it was a double whammy for us here at the roastery and having the cafe downtown. But the silver lining in it is the cafe started to sell a lot of retail coffee. Like we were selling 200-300 bags a month of coffee. People were coming in to get Barocco coffee from the cafe. So that was one, change. And getting back, I wanted to touch on the point that you said earlier, because I think it's something that a lot of people may not understand or miss, is that I always use the analogy. If you go to the grocery store and you buy a bag of cookies, when you take that bag home, your consumption is to open the bag and eat the cookie, right? There's not a lot of, so if I'm a manufacturer of cookies, if I've done my job right and I've made a good cookie, I'm done.
Yeah.
But if you're a coffee roaster and they bring the coffee bean home, people don't realize how many variables there are in coffee, like to make the coffee.
Yeah.
You have the grind, how you store it, the water temperature, the ratios. It's really like a product that, I almost look at it, our roasters as chefs, because even in the roasting process, there's so many variables. So trying to convey that to people, that's one of our biggest challenges today. And if you look at how COVID's affected consumption, obviously people aren't going to the cafes anymore. A lot of them have closed. So they're now consuming at home. So it's forced people to kind of now start to learn, how can I brew my coffee at home? How can I brew better coffee at home?
Sure.
So it's an opportunity because people are now more open to learning that. Whereas before I don't have time to do that. I'll just go to the cafe and get it.
Yeah.
So there's the opportunity now and a challenge.
Yeah, I agree with you. Like in a pre-COVID world, it was more about, hey, can I get my coffee in 60 seconds by pushing a button and it's ready. Right. And now that people have more time, people spending more time at home, obviously, they're willing to learn and the curiosity comes out of, how do I take this bean and produce something good out of it? I think at the same time, in specialty coffee, we need to do a better job of just enabling that consumer to make use of the coffee. And, whether it's, training or tutorials or videos or whatever it is, we have to bridge that gap. Because I think as an industry, it's actually really hard sometimes for people to get into specialty coffee.
Well, they get intimidated.
Exactly.
Right? They're intimidated by that and they just shut off because it's like, this is too complex for me.
Yeah, for sure. And I think another opportunity that I see is more ready to drink kind of cold brew or concentrates or other ways to get specialty coffee into a consumer's cup without them having to jump through all these hoops. Are you seeing anything, like any other trends in terms of how people want to consume coffee?
Well, certainly cold brew has been a big growth category, more so in the United States and certainly more so in warmer climates.
Yeah.
Canada has a shorter warm climate period where the consumption of cold brew tends to spike, but there are people that drink cold brew year round and enjoy that form of coffee drinking. So we have seen a growth in that. There's definitely barriers to entry because it's to do it in a large scale. It's the manufacturing requires significant investment. We do cold brew here. You can do it in small batch and kegs, which again, because our focus has been restaurants and cafes and bars, we do it in kegs. Right. We did do bottled a couple of years ago, but it was a very cost heavy process and not a lot of basically no margin, and it was more of a branding exercise. Right. So I find there's companies that focus on cold brew and companies that focus on roasting, and then you have a few that do both. Both well. In terms of instant, we are seeing companies in the States starting
Yeah.
to do freeze-dried specialty.
Wow.
You know, I've sampled a little bit. There's a company out of San Francisco. I can't recall the name now, but so I think from a technological standpoint, that's going to that may have some legs.
Yeah.
But I don't know. It's like
Yeah.
capsules was. You know, I mean, everyone thought capsules was going to replace, but you know, I see capsules and pods and all that stuff going like this, and now because
Interesting.
eventually, you know, it's not. How do you replace? It's like bread, fresh bread. Like, are you ever going to replace a baker freshly baking bread, buying it that day and consuming it?
Right.
You know, so
Yeah.
coffee,
Right.
fresh roasted, or even aged, because some people, you know, you age coffee because it has to degas, and
Right.
sometimes it reaches its best tasting a week or 2 weeks later.
Right.
But the point is, it's very hard to replace that experience
Right.
of taking a fresh roasted coffee bean, grinding it, brewing it. Once you've experienced that,
Right.
it's like drinking a fine wine versus you know, a commodity cheap one.
Right. Yeah, I mean, in terms of quality, it's not going to be the same. And I guess, like, you know, this freeze-dried instant, and I've even seen tea bags
Yeah.
with coffee in them. I've even seen these like disposable pour-overs where you kind of open it like an origami and then you kind of pour and you throw it away. But I haven't seen any mass adoption on these yet, and I think it's like very low volume because you just can't get the same quality out of it, right? So now, in terms of, you know, going forward with specialty coffee, with consumers now wanting to learn more and you know, a movement towards more sustainability in the industry, what are your thoughts on you know, coffee sustainability and transparency and where we're headed in this third wave of coffee?
Well, I think certainly before the pandemic hit, or even going back a year ago, let's say, a lot of conversation was centered around the consumption of coffee was going up with climate change. The production of coffee is going to decrease. So at some point in the future, I think they were predicting 2050, there would be a global shortage of coffee, right? Then the pandemic hit, and now you have consumption has gone down, and people are farmers are having trouble selling their beans. So obviously, it's a fluctuating situation. But climate change, we all know, is a real thing, and it is affecting it. And I think that getting more awareness between the industry that roasts and serves coffee, so cafes and roasters, to understand and communicate better with the farming end of it, so that we can work together in ensuring that the sustainability is there. That, you know, there's even the fact that there's a lot of farms that are converting from, you know, whether it be corn or wheat or some other commodity that isn't selling as much or isn't growing, to coffee to meet up with the demand, you know. But unfortunately, I think it requires the roasting community coming together, because if you take all the independent roasters globally, if there was an association, which, I mean, there's a specialty coffee association. But if you had roasters coming together, they have a lot of power together. Obviously, the big companies like Starbucks, Tim Hortons, they drive so much of the volume that they have to kind of lead that. And I know that Howard Schultz was working on that end of it before he stepped down. But you definitely need a lot of people pulling together to kind of make that link.
Yeah, for sure. And I think, like, when it comes to coffee farming, coffee production, they faced a lot of challenges. Like you mentioned global warming, but Roya, which is the disease to the
Central American,
so that was a huge issue. Combined with climate change, with, you know, low price of coffee consistently for 40 years, and even like foreign exchange risk. So that affects a lot of producers. And, you know, COVID just kind of was another layer on top of all of that. And I think what you're saying makes sense, is getting roasters who play a huge part in, one, educating the consumer on what kinds of coffee are sustainable and why it's sustainable, and in turn, them being able to tell the story to the consumer, right? So then the consumer is educated, and the consumer knows what to buy. And I think the consumer, at the end of the day, is probably the most important actor in the supply chain because they vote with their wallet on what they want to consume. So getting the roasters who are kind of that last mile in front of the consumers is critical for sure. And when you look at sustainability, it's such a broad term, and I still trying to understand what it means fully. But there's obviously financial sustainability, then there's environmental, and there's social. So many aspects of sustainability. One thing I don't like is a lot of people saying, "Hey, we're sustainable," and
what does that mean?
Not really even
defining it.
Just throwing it out there because it's like a buzzword and it's cool. So a lot of people misleading consumers, unfortunately. So I think we need to come together. The roasters and Toronto and globally need to come together and just kind of inform the consumer what's going on and tell the story and educate consumers. I think that's one solution, and that's what we're trying to do at We the Origin and through this podcast with Barocco and a lot of the other content that we're going to be putting out there. We're trying to educate consumers.
Yeah, well, I agree, and I think if you take a look at the history of this whole sustainability movement, I mean, you have fair trade that started way back when.
Yep.
That's also been under a lot of criticism for what does fair trade truly mean?
Yeah.
How many people really know what fair trade truly means? There's Rainforest Alliance. So there's a lot of organizations that have come up to do good things.
Yeah.
But you're right. I mean, personally, I'd like to see it to get to a point where, there should be a law on what you can use. You know how there's the USDA organic, you have to get a certification. I'd like to eventually see that come into the coffee industry for you to be able to put on your coffee bag a certain term.
Yeah.
It needs to be certified that you can use that term.
Yeah. Okay.
When you ask what sustainability means, I mean, from an environmental and economical standpoint, to me, it means that if I'm a farmer in, let's say, Ethiopia, and I'm farming coffee beans, that I'm able to continue doing that and make a living, and that I'm doing it in a way that my children can continue to do that.
Yeah.
Both economically and from a climate that the farm is able to produce the beans. Yeah. So what's required for those farms to be able to do that, and what can we do to work together to help ensure that?
Yeah, I think sustainability to me, in addition to that, just means that everyone who's involved in the coffee supply chain is profitable.
Right.
And coffee could pass through 8, 10, 12 hands from the farmer to the cup here. Yes. So ensuring that everyone along that chain is profitable in their business is the only way to make it financially sustainable.
I would take it a step further. I wouldn't just say that everyone on that chain needs to be profitable. I think everyone in that chain who's adding value needs to be profitable.
Yeah,
because let's face it, there's people in that chain that are adding no value and are profiting.
Yes.
So how do we cut that out? How do we shine a light on that and cut it out? And I think that's a great thing for We the Origin to do, and what your initiative is actually doing.
Yeah, for sure. And I think a lot of these certifications, it's great that they're out there and that they cover some of the cases. But I know for super small hold farmers that have less than 3 hectares, they can't afford to get the certification because of all the paperwork and just the investment that's required to apply for some of these certifications. So it's helpful if you're a certain size, but if you're small, it's out of reach for you.
That's the thing. Like the certifications on the farming end are not reachable. Like there's how many farmers out there are organic? Like just they don't use any pesticides, but they can't get a certification because of the fee. And I'd like to see that struck down, because why punish them, or why not allow them to get more money for their product just because they can't afford to pay somebody to come in and give them the stamp.
Exactly. So I think these are some great ideas we're throwing around, and there's somewhere between 20 to 25 million of these smallhold farmers with 3 hectares or less. Yeah. So it's a pretty big kind of community of farmers around the world who are struggling and who could benefit from having something in place like this. And I think that's something that I want to explore with We the Origin. And I think that's a great idea, what you brought up. What do you think about, the coffee pricing crisis? So like for 40 years, the price has been $1. Like it might go up to $2. It might come down to 70, 80 cents. It's kind of fluctuating around that dollar mark. Today, I think it's just under $1.
Right.
What do we do? Like, how do we fix this problem? Because it's clearly not, a reflection of what it costs to produce coffee.
No, that's a tough one. I mean, the commodity market, has oil and coffee, and a lot of people may not know this. It's the second largest traded commodity
Coffee.
after oil.
Yeah.
It's number 2 in the world, and that's how big it is, and that's how. And you just said the number of how many farmers it affects.
Yeah.
Millions and millions. So the fact that a stock exchange, an index, is what decides what price goes on that bean that they've farmed is not fair. I don't know the political actions that would be required to dismantle that. But the reality is, I think one of the answers to dealing with that is the direct trade model. Because certainly if I'm a farmer in Rwanda and I'm able to pick up the phone or go on my computer and email Bruno at Barocco and say, hey, I have this to sell, and we make a deal on the price, and I buy that coffee the way I would anything else, that would be the fairest thing, because that farmer is going to want to charge a price that makes them whole, right? That feeds them, that makes them a profit, and I'm happy to buy it from them, and then I go make my profit. That's the challenge, as opposed to that farmer having to sell at the number that the New York Stock Exchange is telling them that that's all they can get for that bean. And then it goes through all those 8 levels. So I think that's one of the ways. But how we get there, I don't know. I mean, I think this conversation and what you're doing and people finding a way, I think the direct trade model is certainly an answer. But how do we make the direct trade model more prevalent in our industry?
How do you scale it up? Because that farmer doesn't have access to market. So someone will show up and say, here's the price today.
Exactly.
And the farmer either has to sell or hold on to it and hope for an increase in the price. So that's basically the only option they have, is like, do I sell it today or do I sell it next month or 2 months from now? And that's because they don't have access to market. So we need to figure out a way to scale this up where, hey, you want to buy 5 bags from Rwanda from a micro lot, a specialty producer who's producing incredible coffee, and how do you connect with that person and make that transaction happen? And right now, the logistics, the infrastructure is not in place to facilitate something like that. And actually, it kind of breaks my heart, because I love coffee, and you get these incredible coffees that people are producing in small quantities, and they just don't have access to get it to market. So it ends up being mixed with other commodity coffee, lower grade coffee. It all gets mixed up, and you never get to experience what that producer was trying to build there. So a lot of quality and a lot of value is being lost in the coffee supply chain, just based on how things are structured right now.
The other challenge too in those countries is a lot of them happen to be in areas or regions that are experiencing a lot of political conflict, genocide, and that's even another layer of complexity. So not only do you have the challenge of reaching them, but the fact that they have to overcome local forces that are preventing them from making a living.
They can't even get the coffee out.
Exactly.
Right. And I think a lot of coffee producing nations are kind of built on the back of colonization. So like the British and the French back in the days, in Kenya, they set up a structure there where coffee is produced almost for free. So we've never really, sprung out of that. And I think that's why coffee is still produced at, or expected to be produced at such a low level.
Exactly.
Under $1. And it's never really evolved from that. And I think what you're saying is, if there's a way to move away from the commodity market, obviously there's a whole political aspect to it, which I don't know much about either. But one of the things that came out of a recent event we did at the Jump Conference was when we actually brought producers and farmers to the same table, forward contracts. So a lot of producers who understand the challenges that farmers go through are really buying coffee more in forward contracts and securing coffee for, hey, I need coffee 6 months down the line. Let's reach an agreement now, and we'll buy the coffee at this price, and it's done independently of the commodity market. It's not even a differential that's tied to the commodity market. It's a privately negotiated agreement. Right. And I think that is one solution. It still doesn't allow you to buy coffee from a smallhold farmer in Rwanda necessarily. So I think there's some potential in exploring more forward contracts and how we can do that at scale. And I think that could be one solution. And we can start with smaller scale, like start with a few farmers and then scale it up to 1,000 farmers and then 1 million farmers. And that's one of the ideas that I want to explore at We the Origin, is how can we enable a producer to sell 5 bags of coffee to someone like you. And if we can provide that infrastructure, that's a conversation we want to start to get rolling to see if it has any legs.
I think there would be value in that for sure, because a lot of roasters do have some visibility into what their needs are going to be. I say that with an asterisk today because of the climate that we're in with the pandemic. It's certainly introduced a new level of uncertainty and risk. But under more normal circumstances, you do have visibility in what your needs are. So I think forward contracts and committing to farmers is good, because it gives the roaster the peace of mind that they've secured what they need to roast quality coffee. And it's given the farmer the peace of mind to know, I'm going to go and do this work, but I'm going to get paid for it. I'm not going to be stuck at the end trying to figure out how am I going to sell my product.
Absolutely. So I think it's good because it helps you build a relationship better with the producer. And it's also more efficient because you don't have coffee sitting in a warehouse. If you have a forward contract, the coffee will not be in transit as much. So logistics costs will go down, and you can rest knowing that, hey, I'm going to get my coffee in 6 months. And the producer will know, hey, someone's going to buy the coffee and take ownership of it. So I think it makes sense to explore this a bit more for sure. So with this, I think it's good that we've started a conversation around it. More and more people are jumping into the conversation, which is great. And with people like Barocco leading the charge, I think the next few years are going to be interesting to see how we come out of COVID. And I feel like the coffee industry is going to be much better off in a few years. So certainly we're headed in the right direction.
Yeah, and I think shedding light on these things and having these conversations is important. And I think getting, coffee is such a wildly consumed product, but such a small percentage of the people know about all the things that you and I have just spent the last while speaking about. So, how can we start to educate and give people that information in digestible amounts? Right. Because it is overwhelming and it is intimidating, not just the whole green end and the whole sustainability end and pricing, but even the consumption end of it, right? It's such I feel privileged to be in an industry and to work with a product that I have so much passion for. But I there's days that you feel that you're just scratching the surface. Yeah, for sure. We're not even making a dent into the job ahead. Yeah, for sure. I'm excited to what the future will bring and how coffee will evolve and what Barocco's role will be in it. But I'm humbled by the fact that, there's a lot of work to do.
Yeah, for sure. It's very complex. And in today's generation, it's like the attention spans are lower. How do you explain what we've talked about in a way that's easy to consume, right, for the average consumer? And that's been a challenge, and I think we need to figure that part out. Again, if we get the consumer on board, then I think everything else will kind of fall into place. And I think one example I'm thinking about is, if you just go back 20 years, people wouldn't really pay attention to the label on the box in the grocery store. But now people...
Folgers and Maxwell's.
Exactly. But now people want the information. They want the breakdown. They want to know, where is this from? Is it sustainable? And consumers are asking for this. So now it's our job to give them what they're asking for in a way that makes sense for them. Absolutely. What you guys are doing is incredible. And that's why I'm so excited to have this chat with you. Also to have some of this great coffee. So
well, I'm sure our paths will be crisscrossing down the road as we...
For sure. So thank you again, Bruno. This was our first podcast ever, so there will always be a special place in We the Origin for Barocco Coffee Company. And I hope to do another one in the future. And
we'd love to.
We'll share more stories and see how things evolve. And really excited to see where you guys go. So again, thank you very much, and we'll have you back on the podcast very soon.
Thank you, Abbas. It was a real pleasure, and look forward to it.